uncomfortable things for perpetuity's sake is minimal.
That's right. Okay, so it doesn't say it's recording to the cloud, but my guess is probably is.
I think it is. Yeah, the one I had it originally selected, that's where it's going.
Do we know whose cloud it goes to?
PNJs, I would assume.
We'll find it.
We'll find it.
We'll find it somewhere in the cloud.
It's better lost in the cloud than cluttering up our hard drives anyway. So
exactly. Yes. See if I can get rid of the glare from my window. There we go. That might be better. It's going to be dark anyway by the end of the workshop. That's the funny thing, is the weather's nice, but it gets dark at 6.
At 6, that's crazy.
Yeah. Well, because they, it was the winter solstice for them in June.
Right. Yeah, of course.
No, it's full on winter here. It's weird.
I was just in England last week, and it did, there was still light in the sky at 10 p.m. and it was just
nice.
It was
That's
something
really nice. I love that. That's one thing I missed. I missed like those long days.
Yeah.
Well, we left the day after the summer solstice in the States.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And then at first it was getting dark before 6. Now it's getting dark at around 6. Is that how it is for you, Anne?
Yeah, I think so. Well, you know what? It's been so cloudy until today that it would just go from being cloudy to pitch black. Now, and it's actually very beautiful right now. So.
Yeah, it's nice here.
Looks like we have a nice group here already.
Yeah,
I know. This is great. People are punctual.
See what a little bit of R&R does? It makes people ready to.
I know. Clearly, they're all ready and excited to start the school year.
Yep. We have permission to set up our classrooms on August 21st, moving forward from that. So I'm excited about that.
Oh, when's your first day?
It's not until the first week of September, actually. We start a little bit late, which is.
That's when my Sam starts, September 5th.
Oh, but that's nice though, that you get a couple of weeks to set up your classroom. Do you have a week for PD also, or?
Yeah, it's really I like this pace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I, on the other hand, come home August 14th, and then have to promptly turn around and take Ocean to school, my daughter to school. So
yeah,
there won't be much turnaround time.
Yeah. I think back on the time when my father took me to my dorm in my freshman year. And as I was so eager for him to just like drop me off and go away. It didn't matter that we traveled 3,000 miles to get there.
Nope.
Yes, I have a 7.5-hour drive waiting for me.
Yeah.
Fun.
But it's a cool destination, you got to admit.
Oh, I'm so excited for her.
Wow, we already have 2 full Zoom screens of people. That's exciting.
Wait, I have everybody on one. How did I manage that?
Mine are on 2.
Oh, mine are on 1.
Oh. Our picture's really small.
Yeah. I can barely see myself.
That's kind of a plus. Let me see how I can do it. So
I don't know how I did this.
Oh, yeah. No, I see no, I have 2 screens. Oh, I see one person in the chat saying no audio. My recommendation would be to come out of the meeting, leave the meeting, and try coming back in and seeing if that fixes it.
Yeah, I think they did. I think
I
just did. Thank you so much.
Oh, perfect. Good. Excellent.
Oh, now I have 2 Zoom screens.
All right, it's 3 o'clock. We'll give it one more minute for the people who are logging on, and then we'll get this show on the road. There isn't a waiting room, so people can just turn up as they do.
Okay. Do you want us to share the slides, Tim, now, or wait a minute or two?
Yeah, I'd wait a minute or two. I mean, I'm sure you could just share it multiple times. That's going to be necessary anyway, but yeah. All right. All right, we've got a robust 50, so let's get 51 even. Let's go ahead and get started. You're certainly welcome to share the slides for the first time in the chat link if you in the chat box if you'd like.
Oh,
thank you very much. I'll download them as well.
Okay.
I'll give a brief introduction and then we can get rolling. So, all right, well, welcome everybody. On behalf of the College of New Jersey and the Office of Offsite Graduate Programs and Dr. Wu and his professional development grant, which is funded by our very own U.S. Department of Education, I would like to welcome Dr. Catherine Box and Dr. Ann Pomerantz all the way from Chile in South America. They'll be providing our workshop today in a long-standing commitment to language education. Dr. Box and Dr. Pomerantz are faculty at the University of Pennsylvania Educational Linguistics program, where they have been passionate, long-time teacher educators. Among their many strengths, they bring critical, applied perspectives on language, literacy, social justice, and equity in the education of multilingual learners. And in addition to their work at University of Penn, they have an incredible LLC called Multilingual Works, which serves to consult and collaborate with school districts and institutions of higher education, not just in the tri-state area, but also, as evidenced by their presence in Chile, internationally. And so I welcome you both, and I thank you once again for joining us to provide incredible workshops. We have you today and tomorrow, if I understand correctly. And at this point, I would like to hand the reins of today's session over to you.
Thank you for having us, Tim, and thank you for the introduction. It's really good to see everybody. Thank you for coming out during your summer to learn about some of the topics that we've selected today and also tomorrow. Today, we're going to be looking more at elementary grade issues that affect elementary grades. Tomorrow, we'll be looking more at secondary grades, but hopefully everybody will have something to take away from both of these. My name is Catherine, and as Tim said, we are both on faculty at the University of Pennsylvania, and we both work in the Educational Linguistics program, where we work primarily with training people who plan to work in multilingual classrooms. I was a teacher both in the United States and also in France. And then I worked for a long time with New York City in the New York City schools. And then I moved to Philadelphia, where I work with Philadelphia area teachers. And I really enjoy working with people who are committed to providing equitable access for multilingual learners. So we're really excited to talk to you about this topic today. Andy, you want to take a second to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Like Catherine said, we're coming to you today from northern Chile, where we've been working with university faculty at La Universidad Católica del Norte to talk about how they might integrate some language education into their post-secondary program, specifically teaching some of their content area courses in English. Like Catherine, I too have spent a lot of years working with language educators and with educators more broadly. I was a Spanish teacher for many years. I was an ESL teacher, working primarily in community settings. So it's really exciting to have everybody here and to just see this many people here on a Sunday afternoon to talk about an issue that has been in the news quite a bit, which is the teaching of reading. And in particular, the teaching of reading in the elementary grades. And so that's our focus for today. Catherine, should I share slides?
I can share them.
Okay.
There we go. Is that visible to everybody?
Yeah. So here we are. And why don't we move to the second slide and you can just take a minute. There are a lot of us. Maybe to introduce ourselves. So maybe go back one, Catherine. Oh, there we go. So if you all could really briefly, just in the chat, put in your name, where you teach, what school are you at, what school district, what grades you teach. This can help us, this will help us to get to know one another a little bit. All right, I see some fellow Spanish language educators here.
I've been a Spanish student all summer long because I did not speak Spanish before I came to Chile, although I am getting better. I have successfully ordered food in restaurants and all kinds of good
Catherine's
stuff.
our star student.
Yes.
And I see lots of people in New Jersey. Very exciting.
It's great to see a lot of familiar names. People I've worked with in schools. It's really great to see you all.
This is making me homesick for being home, seeing the names.
I know. I see West Windsor Plainsboro, one of my daughter's rivals in the Science Olympiad competitions. She is now graduating and going off to college this year, but she talked a lot about her challenges with how talented that Science Olympiad team is.
Oh, yes, a nice mix of people here.
I know, this is going to be great. Oh, your family's from Chile, Julie. That's wonderful. Cool. I've fallen in love, I have to say.
It is very beautiful here. And it was nice to miss the heat wave in the US, I have to say. That I did not miss the heat in Philadelphia this summer.
And we have somebody from Spain too.
Cool. I'm just kind of scrolling through here. Some folks who are in their graduate work. Very cool. All right, so why don't we, Catherine, you want to go back and share the agenda for a minute?
Sure. Okay, so what we're going to be doing today is really focusing on the science of reading. For those of you that are teaching in the United States, this has become a point of both resources for teachers, but also there's been a lot of controversy surrounding the adoption of the science of reading. I know that it has also been adopted worldwide. So if you are in a country where the science of reading is used, then you'll be able to make some connections as well. And we're going to spend some time talking about it for those of you that might not have heard of it before. It is becoming really a principal approach to teaching reading in New Jersey and in other parts of the United States, as I mentioned. We're also going to talk specifically about what the science of reading and the strategies used in the science of reading means for English learners in the primary grades. I think secondary teachers, this will also be helpful for you to understand a bit of what elementary students are engaging in, and specifically English learners. And we're going to be, I guess we can say from the outset, taking a critical eye towards the science of reading, as we take a critical eye to all approaches of teaching reading, notably because of the persistent absence of considering multilingual learners when we talk about the teaching of reading. And we're also going to discuss advocacy strategies to help you kind of navigate the waters as you are finding the best fit for your multilingual learners, whether you're in the content classroom or whether you work in the resource room or in standalone English learning classrooms. And even if you're working in international schools where you have multilingual learners, this will be for you as well. We anticipate just a short screen break at 4:15 p.m. just to give you a breather. But other than that, we're going to be going pretty much straight through. This is going to be an interactive workshop, so you will have group work. We will do our best to try to hear from you. I know there's a lot of you, but we are going to ask you to share your thoughts with us to try to keep the spirit of the workshop as we move forward. Anne, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, in the chat, I just put a link to the slide deck we'll be using today. It's a Google slide deck. I strongly urge you to click on the link and access the slides. There are a few interactive activities that will require you to read something or look at something. And so all the links are in the slides. So I would encourage you to just take a minute and access those slides. And if anyone has any trouble getting them, if you could alert us in the chat or by unmuting yourself, that would be great.
Yes, and if you want to participate in the conversation as we're talking, feel free to do so. You can either unmute yourself and simply shout out, or you can put it in the chat. And while one of us is talking, the other one will be monitoring the chat to make sure we're addressing any questions you might have as they come up.
Okay, so with that said, why don't we move to our first topic, which is really to kind of get us started. We'd love to give you a chance to talk a bit about how reading is taught in the primary grades at your school. We imagine that there is likely some variation. Some of you are in the primary grades and maybe know more about reading instruction in the early years. Some of you maybe know from your colleagues or have a sense. There's a lot of movement in schools, particularly in the United States right now, around new curricula. The School District of Philadelphia just purchased all new curricula for reading and math. And they're just kind of getting started implementing those curricula. So there's been a lot of changes in recent years. And so for our first activity, what we'd like you to do is we're going to put you into breakout rooms. And Catherine, I have the breakout rooms ready, I think. You'll have probably 4 to 5 people in your room. And we'd like you to discuss, first we'd like you to identify a note taker and a reporter. Note taker, you are of course responsible for taking some notes during the conversation. Reporter, you'll be the one responsible for sharing out. When we come back to the main room, we'll likely call on you by your group number. So by your breakout room number. So as you join your breakout room, just kind of make a note of what room you're in, just so we can kind of organize a little. We are 62 people, so we would like to hear from you, but we do need to use a little organization to make that happen. While you're in your breakout rooms, the questions are here on the slide. Again, I strongly encourage you to access the slides so you can see the questions during the chat, during our conversations. How is reading taught at your grade level and at your school? How is reading assessed at your grade level and at your school? So what counts as being good at reading, being not great at reading? I'm going to send, I think there was a request to send the slides again. So let me do that
right now. Mm-hmm.
You've got that, Catherine?
Yep.
Great. And then finally, we'd like you to consider some strengths and limitations for this approach to teaching and assessing reading with particularly with respect to English learners or multilingual learners. So we will be in the breakout rooms for about 15 minutes, and then we will welcome you back. So I am going to create those rooms. I think we're good. Let me see for time. Yep, we're at 15 minutes. Okay, one last thing before we go in there. If anyone needs us, Catherine, do you want to share us? I have my cell phone off. Do you want to share a cell phone number, or I can put my WhatsApp?
Nope, I got it.
You got it. Okay. Here, you know what? I can also turn my phone back on. So I'm going to put it here.
You can text me for free, even though I'm in South America. It's an American number. You can text me for free, or you can also text me on WhatsApp. That is the preferred platform of communication in South America and Europe, I believe, as well. So feel free. I've got it downloaded and am consulting it every few minutes.
Yeah, so you can. I think it's free to text me as well. Okay, so I'm going to open the rooms and we will see you back in 15 minutes.
Yes, you can message in the chat as well, Stephanie. Wonderful. Oh, you have a timer.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I never knew that. Oh, right.
Do we want to pause the recording?
Yes. We are going to hear from people about how reading is taught and assessed in their schools. Okay, I'm going to close the breakout rooms, Anne.
All right. Yep, close them. Sounds good. Okay. Oh, it gives them another 30 seconds. I thought they just closed. Okay.
Yeah, I thought so too, but I think people are finished.
Oh, fine. Okay. All right. Here, everyone's coming back.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. I think everybody's back now. Good. All right. So what we'd like to do is just, we're not going to be able to hear from every group, but we are going to be keeping you in the same breakout rooms for the entire session. And then our hope is that we'll be able to hear from your group at least once during the course of our time together today. But again, as you recall, we were asking, how is reading taught and assessed in your schools? And then, as it stands now, what are some of the strengths and the limitations of these approaches with respect to English learners? Most of us are working with English learners either exclusively or as part of a content classroom. So let's actually just start from the very beginning, room one. I'm just going to call this Amy Marino's group because that's the first name on it. So could your designated spokesperson tell us a little bit about what your group discussed?
Hey, so we talked a little bit about each and everyone's experience, whether it's like in the school for online learning. For the most part, I think one of our members, Sadia, shared that she teaches high school. In the past, she taught high school, and she's from London. So they did textbooks and going into like phonics programs. And what they usually do is choosing a novel that actually relates to the theme. And Angela talked about reading workshops. They did a Lucy Calkins workshop, and they realized that their school that was something that was not working from them. They're moving away from it. For the most part now they use foundations. And Mina and myself, we both go to Learning Community Charter, so we actually do foundations and so DRA testing to assess students. And then I know Amy's mentioned, and it was like the last 12 seconds we had, Amy mentioned she's also an ESL teacher, and she said that Lakewood, she's from Lakewood, so Lakewood has their own curricula that they utilize. So I think a lot of us are using some tools, but we're moving away slowly from some of the tools that we've currently started using, because we realized that our school is not strongly supporting those students.
Thank you for sharing that. So foundations, I believe, is one of the approved curricula with proponents of the science of reading. So if you're using foundations, probably a lot of what we're discussing will look familiar when we talk about the science of reading. Lucy Calkins' units of study, that, you know, whether you call it the Teachers College method or the units of study method or whatever, I would say that is kind of the other end of the spectrum. And we'll be talking about that in our lecture as well, our first mini lecture. So thank you very much, group one. Group two, I'm going to call this Stacy Pastorella's group because that's the first name that appears in room two. Could your designated spokesperson tell us a bit about what you discussed? I'm not sure if there's an audio issue with room two.
I think it's my group. So I guess I'll go.
Yes, that is your group, Gabby.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so we kind of just talked about the few of us who are teachers. We kind of said that a lot of us used workshop, and like my school this past year, we didn't have any ESL students. They were all at a specific school. But you know, there's not much support, I guess, even for students who are struggling with reading in general. You know, just kind of like do the workshop, you know, and we talked about how there was some backlash with Lucy Calkins and how her program maybe isn't the best, but some, you know, districts just keep using it. And I think someone said that their district was looking into changing it, but you know, it's a lot about reading levels and moving students along with that, and it may not be the best. We talked a lot about how even students, or like when there are students who are English learners, you know, I went to TC&J undergrad and now I'm in my master's there, and I feel like I didn't get any training with special ed or English language learners. So I feel like there needs to be, from, I guess, from teachers earliest, you know, learning, you know, as you know, in undergrad, they need to be taught about how to help students, not just like the average kid who can speak English and has not many academic issues. I feel like has to be from the beginning, to best help these students, because a lot of districts don't always support teachers in that way to help the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something we're going to talk a lot about today. Is it seems like no matter which kind of curricula there is, we often are left wanting for resources for English learners, and to a certain extent, students with exceptional needs on other spectrum as well. I believe that if anything that's called like reading workshop or guided reading would kind of fall into the more whole language approach. And so if you're using something that's called like reading workshop or guided reading, you would probably be kind of in that being used curricula that's in that area as well. And it's true that a lot of places are moving away from that kind of approach, or in the process of moving away, or at least people feel they should be moving away. But yet, some of the strategies still persist. All right.
Do we want to hear, let's hear from room 3. So that's Lois, Ken, Julia. Those are some of the names in group 3. If you want to say a word about what your group discussed.
I'm the recorder. That's me. Hi. I'm glad you said my name, because I actually forgot to write my group number. So now I'll take note of it. But we had a lot of different things that we said we use for reading. Some people use one district used strictly phonics, but then that was like to the detriment of comprehension. Some use OG foundations. Like I know my district were using foundations and OG for as an intervention, but foundations is being like rolled out for every grade level. And in Princeton, they're rolling out OG for every grade level.
I'm just putting in the chat what OG stands for anybody that might not know. Orton Gillingham, which is also a science of reading approved approach.
And a lot of and I know, like in South Brunswick, we also use a reading and writing workshop. And again, one of the things that we talked about, and I think we all agreed upon, was that a lot of times, especially when it's something that where comprehension questions are part of a kit, or part of something that's there's an assumption of prior knowledge that a lot of our kids don't have. And especially I'm an ELL teacher, so my kids don't have that, but we all agreed that was an issue, is the assumption with any of these programs of prior knowledge, and that we all come with the same experiences, which we don't. But we all agree that when you do something like foundations or OG with its systematic approach and rolling it out like over time and layering it seems to be the most effective.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you that use foundations, which does a lot of like sound letter correspondence and letter scooping or word scooping and things like that, OG I think is even more. They do a lot with using your hands to put words together, like like sack, things like that. And they use a lot of cards and have a lot of materials to manipulate, as does foundations. But oftentimes Orton Gillingham is used as part of an intervention, but some schools do use it as at tier 1 as well.
I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Ken.
No,
Part of that group. I'm a certified Orton Gillingham teacher, and I think there's some confusion here. I just want to clarify for people.
Sure.
Samuel Orton was a scientist and Anna Gillingham was a teacher, and together they developed a method. So Orton Gillingham is a method, it's not a program. So for example, Wilson is a program that is based on foundation, that is based on the Orton Gillingham method or the approach. Sunday is, our school in Princeton is using IMSE as, but it is still, it's an Orton Gillingham method. So there are a lot of other things, but it is a method that a lot of other programs or boxed programs have taken pieces of to create a program. So the OG program has a lot, or the OG method has a lot of flexibility, and the true training is very intense.
Right. Yeah, it often takes a long time. And I know there are people that are certified in Wilson and then they'll say they're certified in OG, and there's a lot of confusion following the difference between box curricula and entire approaches. Thank you for that.
You know, there's a question in the chat. Is Reading Workshop a Science of Reading approved approach? They've recently updated their materials to embed phonics in their reading and writing units. That's an interesting question. I mean, I think what we're going to look at in a moment is kind of what is the science of reading and how does one get, you know, I think this past comment, right? Orton Gillingham as an approach, and then there are commercial products that take up that approach. To what extent is a particular packaged curriculum kind of faithful to an approach or a singular approach? How much does it borrow from different approaches? I think the answer to the question is Reading Workshop and SRO approved approach. It's not that easy an answer, because who approves whether or not it's science of reading, right? And this is what we're going to turn to in a moment, is exactly who is the science of reading and who determines whether or not a particular instructional approach is informed by the findings, by research findings, and to what does it even mean to inform an approach by findings? So I actually think it might be a good segue into moving to talking a little bit about that.
Short answer, actually, though, to that question is, like, for instance, New York City does not approve the phonics embedded instruction and has taken the reading and writing workshop off their list of approved curricula. But that was the decision of one particular school district, right? So it's really up to the local education agencies to decide whether they consider something sufficient or insufficient. And, you know, again, a good segue into the science of reading and exactly who is it, right?
And what is it?
Do you want me to share my?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
So we've been using a lot of words, right? We've been using a lot of titles. We're talking about something called OG. We've heard a lot of different acronyms. Science of Reading, or SOR, if you want to flip through to the next one, Catherine, is often defined in the following way. The science of reading is a comprehensive body of research that encompasses years of scientific knowledge, spans across many languages, and shares the contributions of experts from relevant disciplines such as education, special education, literacy, psychology, neurology, and more. So we often, when we see a definition of the science of reading, it often looks something like this. And I put the link from where this definition comes from, but the kind of thing to keep in mind is it's always described as a comprehensive body of research. This particular author goes on to say, this conclusive, empirically supported research provides us with the information we need to gain a deeper understanding of how we learn to read, what skills are involved, how they work together, and which parts of the brain are responsible for reading development. From this research, we can identify an evidence-based practice approach for teaching foundational literacy skills called structured literacy. So on the surface, this sounds very appealing, right? Wow, we've got this body of research and it informs our teaching. But for me, as someone who does research, I'm immediately drawn to the second word in this paragraph, which is this conclusive research. There is almost no research on anything that is conclusive and thus in need of no further refinement. And when we think about something that's as complex as reading, and we're not even at the point where we're thinking about how do we teach reading, just the sheer process of reading, to claim that there is a conclusive body of research that is comprehensive to explain something as complex as reading should immediately set off a few alarm bells for all of us as educators. Now, it is of course true that there is research that explains aspects of how we read, how we learn to read, what different skills are involved. But research itself is a very small, specific, and incremental process. And so some of the claims that are being made about the comprehensiveness and the conclusiveness of science of reading really need to be taken with a major grain of salt. And, you know, obviously this particular definition is kind of to the nth degree of making that kind of claim. But Catherine and I wanted to share it with you because this is the kind of language that is on district websites, is in professional developments, that's slapped on the top of prepackaged curricula. And I think we all need to kind of take a step back from it and really start asking ourselves, well, what actually does the science of research consist of? Because it looks a little shinier on the surface than it does when you start digging a little deeper. So Catherine, can you advance the slides?
Yep.
So Timothy Shanahan, who's a very well-known researcher in the field of reading and who has done extensive work on reading and reading instruction for English learners and for multilingual learners, notes that, you know, some people use this term, science of reading, to reference neurological and cognitive science studies of how brains process written words. Couple of things I just want to stop you with before we even go even farther than that. First of all, this is called the science of reading, so it gives it that kind of very shiny, like, ooh, this must be evidence-based. Cognitive science, and in particular, what we often call in everyday talk brain research, is really at its infancy. And we're really only starting to understand the neurological and cognitive dimensions of reading. So to say there is a comprehensive neurological or even cognitive body of research that's definitive about how we read is a gross overstatement. What we do have are various smaller studies that show us aspects of how we think brains might process written words. And what we know from this is that it's really complicated and there are many different aspects to processing, and that, you know, we know pieces of how people to read, how people come to make meaning from print. Knowing about how people read and knowing how to teach reading are two very different things. And there is a research base on the effectiveness of particular instructional strategies. And that research base is not really part of the science of reading, right? So when people are saying the science of reading, they aren't really, as Shanahan points out, talking about research on reading instruction. They're talking about primarily neurological and cognitive research on the processing of written words. So that's a fairly narrow take on what reading is. I see Ken wrote in the chat, as Marianne Wolf says, we were never born to read. It's a human construct. People learn to read in so many ways. Yes, reading is learned, and reading is a relatively, in an evolutionary sense, a rather new skill.
One of the things that had concerned me, sorry to interrupt a second, Anne, but when I was listening to a podcast espousing the science of reading, one of the proponents said, we've been reading for thousands of years. And that kind of concerned me because that's actually just patently untrue. We have been reading for hundreds of years, but the percentage of the population that was literate until, you know, somewhere in the 19th and even 20th century was very small, right? Yeah. So again, this pointing to longevity as being evidence that we understand how people read is concerning, you know, and that's not to say that the findings don't have validity, but having validity and proven to be valid are two different things. And that, I think, is one of the things we wanted to highlight today.
I mean, if anything, we're not saying that cognitive science has nothing to say about what we know about reading. It has a lot to say, and it has a lot of important things to say, but it's not the whole picture. And it really is in its infancy. So when you see a statement that says the science of reading is a conclusive body of evidence, have a red flag, like red light should be going off at you, because I don't think we have a conclusive understanding of reading. Shanahan goes on to note that historically the term science of reading, because it's not a brand new term, was used to refer to word reading, what many of you probably in your teacher education courses learned as decoding. So the idea of sounding out words is a tradition that goes back 200 years, and current claims align very much with that. So science of reading is actually very often a kind of a narrow, it indicates, or it refers to a fairly narrow kind of take on reading as well. There are a couple more questions in the chat. Anne and Catherine, what's your opinion regarding statistics about how reading and math have plummeted in the United States in the last school year? Reading and math scores have plummeted. They have. That is true. It's an empirical fact. To say that it is with regard to instruction, it's very difficult. Cause and effect is extremely difficult to illuminate in a very rigorous way. There are many factors that have led to the current decline in scores. And the decline looks different in different places and among different populations. Just the sheer amount of disruption we've experienced since the pandemic certainly plays a very big role in this. And I think, as we're going to see in a minute, I think one of the things is people are really eager for a magic bullet or for something new to make a change. And I think that's part of the reason why science of reading is getting so much play right now. But we need to look really carefully at the context in which it's emerging, and we need to look carefully at what it is. Not because everything in the science of reading is wrong or anything like that, but because we just need to proceed with caution. So, Catherine, could you advance the slides for a minute? So we might ask ourselves then where it came from. For as long as we've had mass schooling in the United States, we have had controversy over how to teach reading. Noah Webster of Noah Webster's Dictionary thought that the best approach to teach children to read was by attending to sounds, or the smallest units of meaning, phonemes. Horace Mann, who was an educator and became Secretary of Education in Massachusetts, many schools, many of you maybe have taught or attended a school that was named Horace Mann, thought that we should attend to whole words. So these kinds of tensions around, is reading a bottom-up kind of process or more of a top-down process, have always been with us. I see a question in the chat about the criticisms of Teachers College units of study, if they're valid or not. Hold that thought. We are definitely going to come to that.
Absolutely.
So if we
For
go,
the record, I believe all criticism of any approach is always valid, because we should be constantly evolving as professionals and looking for better ways. I believe there's never one best way. And so therefore, I think any criticism is valid, but we will talk more about that.
So we've always had, just really simply, this tension between bottom-up approaches, which for a long time we referred to as phonics, and top-down, sort of more meaning-making approaches that we often refer to as whole language. And the solution for a long time, if you go forward one more slide, was something we called balanced literacy, that involved, I kind of like this picture because to me, it kind of captures the spirit of balanced literacy. We see a little on the left, there are a whole bunch of different books, and it's a comfortable, so there's whole books, they're grade level, they're options. It's a comfortable space with pillows and stuffed animals, right? This is all part of that. We want to love reading, learn to love reading, have choices, read meaningful texts. But on the wall, we see in our reading corner a whole bunch of flashcards that show letters and words that begin with those letter sounds. So kind of drawing your attention to sound word meaning correspondences, which are very prominent in phonics type instruction. And so that was our solution for a long time until very recently. So what changed? There have been so many media accounts about the science of reading, but here kind of Catherine and I have been talking about this and trying to piece it together ourselves. And here's kind of where we come down. Around 2013 or so, and again, you know, dates, they shift around, there's never one force, but in 2010, 2011, where I was in Philadelphia, there was a massive push to privatize education in the form of charter schools. And this push also included the creation of groups like the National Council on Teacher Quality, many of which were funded, like in this case, the NCTQ, by conservative think tanks. And they were really, as part of the push to privatize public education, we're seeking to minimize the role of universities in teacher preparation and minimize the role of states as well. So they wanted kind of a more laissez-faire school by school approach to how we do teacher education and how we certify teachers. They wanted to kind of deregulate, right? And in a way, and in an effort to do that, they kind of started pushing forward this idea that teachers don't know what they're doing. Schools of teacher education were villains in the story, and that teachers don't know what they're doing because schools of education don't know how to prepare them. And thus we need a new model. If you flash forward to 2020 and beyond, and we start thinking about the pandemic, you know, reading scores plummet during the pandemic, right? Well, we should say they got measured after the pandemic. Well, because we're still kind of in it, but reading scores plummet and there starts being panic, right? People are panicking. And, you know, the plummet looks different in different places. It has different causes in different places. Some districts had more support. Some families had more support. Others did not. We see a huge uptick in parent organizing and advocating, and a lot of it starts to be around looking for new models of reading instruction and math instruction in order to address this situation. We start to see some very high profile media coverage, things like the podcast Sold a Story, that start talking about the problems with reading instruction, start talking about the deficiency of things like the units of study, like whole language. Teachers get cast in this story as culprits, as being kind of either unwitting players in this, they don't know any better, or downright recalcitrant, like they refuse to change. And districts, especially now, have districts that, particularly in urban areas that were really strapped for cash, suddenly find themselves with a lot of cash because of the pandemic recovery funds. And so it makes for this kind of perfect moment for a new approach, or I shouldn't even say a new approach, for a swing in the pendulum to happen, because we've always had these swings between more top-down and bottom-up approaches to teaching reading. And so the pendulum starts to swing, and we're in that swing right now towards a bottom-up, towards more of a bottom-up model of reading instruction. And that's where science of reading is coming in, and science of reading is basically being utilized as a way to support the pendulum shift. And structured literacy is the packaged up commercialized product that grows out of science of reading.
And to be fair, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Catherine.
I was going to say, to be fair, the units of study is also a packaged curriculum, right? And also that some of the criticisms that not all students' needs were being represented. You know, there was a lot of, you know, at least anecdotal evidence, if not more, to suggest that, you know, there was, At times, even if there was space to do phonics instruction, it wasn't happening in the day-to-day in the units of study, right? So we don't want to have it sound like it's all politically motivated. There were some academic-based criticisms of what was going on in balanced literacy programs, where the balance that was supposed to happen in theory wasn't happening in practice.
Absolutely. But I think, you know, one thing to keep in mind is we have test scores, but we don't have test scores don't tell us very much about what causes those test scores, right? So we don't always know that. That's not a straight line. But I think the big takeaway here is that we've always had this tension between bottom up and top down approaches to teaching reading. And we've always had these pendulum swings. And right now we're in a moment in which anything that is thought to come from cognitive science and anything that bears the label evidence-based is looked upon really favorably. And what we kind of want to ask you is just to think a little critically and in the longer and bigger picture about where these ideas come from and what is the research base precisely. I'm going to pause for a moment. Are there questions? There were some questions in the chat that I think we kind of got to.
Share for just a second. That way we can all see each other.
Questions or even comments? Does any of this seem familiar, unfamiliar? I mean, it feels like suddenly science of reading just burst onto the scene, but it's been coming for a while.
And of course, what Anne and I are considering today is the role of English learners and the space for English learners in this story, which is really where we're going for the rest of this, which is, you know, notably, most of these talks historically have not included children who are emerging bilinguals. And whether or not first language literacy is the same as second language literacy, or whether monolingual emergence literacy is the same as emergent bilingual literacy. And that's really going to be our focus. But without that context that we've given you now, it would be hard to kind of position it.
So what we'd like to do now is actually, Catherine, can you share screen again? Is to go back into our breakout rooms. We're going to go back into the same rooms now that you've met each other. And we want to look at some of the media coverage with you. And our question here, if you go to the next slide, is where are ELs? Where are emergent bilinguals? Where are English learners in this story? We picked a story. This one is from the New York Times. The title, the headline is New York is forcing schools to change how they teach children to read. When you access the slides, if you click on that, it will take you to the article. It's a bit long, but what we'd like you to do is in your groups, just read round robin style, maybe take turns. Each of you take a chunk or a paragraph or two, read through the story. Then identify again a note taker and a reporter, so you can decide who's going to speak for your group. And we're really interested in where are English learners in this story? Where are they? So that's where we're going to go next. And Samaya, we'll come back to your question here about SLIFE students when we return back. So we're going to put you in breakout rooms. I'm going to put the slides here again in case anyone needs them.
And in those slides, there's the link to the story, correct?
Yes, the story link is in there. I think if I just open you up here, so I'm going to put you in groups for this. And this time we're going to give you 25 minutes because it's going to take a bit of time to read through the story. So we're going to.
Excuse me, sorry. I clicked on the link, but it says that you have to pay for this.
It doesn't give it to you.
Yeah.
All right, hold on. We will address that in one moment. Let me see how we can do this. Hold up. 1 second. See if I can do that.
I had the same problem and I closed it, reopened it, and it opened the second time.
Oh, it did? Okay.
The second time it opened for me.
All right, let me see, because I may be able to give you, let's see if I can. Does anyone else have this? Oops. Let's try it. Oops, here, wait. Let me try this one. Give this article. Copy link. All right, I'm going to put another link in the chat. Let's see if anybody is having trouble. Let's try this one. Try this one. This is the gift link. It's very long. See if this one works.
Thank you. That one works for me.
Okay. Hopefully you can give it many times or they're going to cancel my subscription because I gave away. Okay. All right. So we're going to go back then to our breakout rooms. So take a moment, get that link. And let's see, breakout rooms. Okay. I'm going to open the rooms and read it. It's a long piece. Read it and answer the question, where are ELLs? Where are multilingual learners? So I think, Catherine, you want to stop sharing? I think
And I'm closing the breakout rooms.
okay.
Maybe that means that because of the year that just happened and we see everything that's going on in the classrooms, now we need more guidance.
Mm.
Okay, I think everybody is back. So we're going to just take some time to share out a little bit concerning this article that you read, and we appreciate your patience. I know it was a long one, but it had a lot of good things in it. And most notably, our guiding question, which is, where are L's in the article? So maybe we could talk a bit, visit our breakout rooms and ask some people to share out. Let me take a look here. Where we left off with group 3, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so we'll move to group 4. The first name I see on it is Anastasia Burke. So her group.
Yes, hi, I'm Stacy. So we noticed in the article there was a paragraph in there, and it seemed that if school districts were really thinking about ELLs in their reading instruction, they would, and I'm just going to read from the article, they would have prioritized phonics alongside work to expand students' background knowledge, vocab, oral language. So there's all those pieces. And even that would not be enough, because they would need teacher training. They would probably need to address the writing piece. They would probably need to address the gaps that older students have if they've missed out on some reading instruction. And then when we look at the 3 programs that were offered, it was this wit and wisdom, expeditionary learning, And then there was another one, into reading, more of a basal program. It seemed like the 3 programs had pieces of that big group of requirements, but not everything. So it felt like in those 3 programs, there were still gaps as far as English language learners were concerned.
Yeah. Okay. So you're identifying a lot of gaps for what is, you know, a significant portion of the population in New York City. And I know many of you that are in urban areas. I know, Tim, you said English language learners make up 40% of your school. Is that right?
Yeah, 40% of the district of Trenton, New Jersey. Yep.
Right. And so we do find it curious that in school districts where English language learners make up a significant portion, you know, there's one paragraph devoted to possibilities for what would benefit English learners. Yeah.
And I think just speaking of reading, I mean, right there is, you know, we're reading this article with this critical eye and we're inferring from what we know in general, right? Like Stacey, what you were saying, building background knowledge, that we know that a very large percentage of the population within schools in New York City is classified and would identify and be identified as multilingual learners, as English learners. And yet, you know, you read the article and that's kind of not explicitly stated and makes, you know, there's not a lot of reference to what we can and should be doing for what is a fairly large percentage of the school population.
Yeah. Thank you, room 5. Okay, so, or that was room 4. Room 5, Katie Crowley's room. That was Katie, Latanya, Lorraine, and others.
Hi, okay. It's Latanya. I was ready for the last one, but
sorry.
No, that's okay. We did make that note as well, like with the amount of English language learners in New York City school system, like where are they represented in this article? We noted that. And again, what piggybacking off of what group 4 said, nothing was cohesive. Nothing was, there were pieces, but there was no like something to bring it all together. Lorraine in my group, she shared with us, if it's not Lorraine, I do apologize. She shared with us how her school is going to be going. I don't know if she wants to share that with us, how her school is going to be doing bilingual immersion classes this school year coming up, but it was very interesting. It seemed like a very dramatic approach, but it was, you know, at least it's doing something for ELLs. At least it is something for ELLs, which this article really didn't address at all.
Right. And to be fair, and this is kind of to Ken's point put in the chat, you know, but prior to this, I mean, I actually went to Teachers College and so did Tim. And I think one of our concerns back then was something that was called the Teachers College method that never once consulted with the TESOL program, right? And so we also had concerns about, you know, other curricula that were, you know, before, and most notably the units of study, where, you know, the department at Teachers College, whose entire job is to consider English learners, was never part of the Teachers College method, right? So this is not new to a place like New York City. And the reason why we chose New York City is, number one, it was in the New York Times, but number two, we all have knowledge of it as a multilingual place, right? So we kind of come with that background. And what this leads to is exactly what Ken asked if we would be discussing, which we will talk about a bit, is when there's not explicit attention paid to second language or bilingual development, then of course, there is the risk of overrepresentation of bilingual or multilingual students coming into classes being classified as having exceptional need. We saw that a lot in districts that we visited, Anne and I, that, you know, seeing students that were classified as having special needs or delays in development that were actually more attributed to their multilingualism. And we're going to talk about specific ways in which that can happen in the next mini lecture. But let's go to one more group. I have Cheryl's group. There were 3 of you. Is there anything you'd like to add or?
Yes, we agreed with a lot of the points that Anastasia and Latanya made. There was no explicit strategies or skill making strategies for English language learners. And the only thing we saw was dyslexia, and we were surprised because I didn't realize that Mayor Adams has this dyslexia. But one of the things that I was thinking is, I read very well in English, but if you gave me a test in Japanese right now, a reading test, I would fail it. And one of the things that I'm thinking about is that the reading skills have gone down, but do we actually know the demographical breakdown of that? Because since we have a changing population, we have a lot more English language learners in this country. And we are, I think either Anne or Catherine said at the beginning, we don't know if these strategies work for second language learners. So again, I'm thinking if you gave me these strategies for Japanese, and I don't know any part of Japanese, I don't know how effectively I would be able to read after using one of these strategies.
Right. I mean, we don't really have any research specifically on that I can point to in the moment. And Anne or Tim, let me know if you do happen to know of them. What we do know is when they point to conclusive bodies of research, which we already problematized, right? But an element of another problem that can be there is that none of that research, to my knowledge, was done on bilingual or multilingual or second language literacy, right? It was done, as far as we know, and from the studies that I'm familiar with, were all done with monolingual English dominant students. And so, or if not that, then monolingual dominant language of the community students, right? So if it was something that might've been carried out in Spain, it was done with Spanish speaking students. So there was not, the body of research that they point to does not address bilingualism. And I think
researchers are clear too, that first language, learning to read when you are monolingual is different from learning to read in a language that you're still learning. Those are not the same processes. Yet there is transfer. One thing we do know is that if you can read in one language, there are elements of your literacy practices that will transfer to another. But was just talking Cheryl about the example of reading in Japanese. Even if you could successfully sound out words in Japanese without any kind of sort of a base of oral language knowledge in Japanese, that would not take you that far, right? So you can learn to decode words in an additional language if you learn that, if it's an alphabetic language. Japanese is not, but if it is an alphabetic language, you can learn to decode and, enunciate the words, but that's only one small piece of reading, right? That's not the whole picture.
Well, what Mary Ellen said is right in the chat. If somebody is a fluent reader in their first language, you know that those skills will transfer mostly positively, sometimes negatively. My second language is French. And of course, I did have to explicitly learn that EAU makes the O sound, which is, which was something that could be extremely challenging at the time. But I was able to, you know, accommodate for that quite quickly, because by the time I started learning French, I was already a highly skilled reader. I was in 7th or 8th grade, right? So we know that if somebody is already able to read, but if they're building their first literacy skills, how does that affect the building of their second literacy skills? That is something that we know at least was not part of the body of research that people point to when they say, you know, we know how people read. And that goes for whether or not you have a more holistic approach or whether you have a more bottom-up approach, right? They're all pointing to research that was done with monolingual students that are speaking the dominant language of their community.
So, and then, yeah.
Of course, it depends on the language too, right? I mean, obviously, for me to learn how to read Chinese would be a whole different ballgame, right? Because now we're going from sound letter correspondence to a language that, you know, uses other ways to associate sound with picture, right?
And, you know, there are cultures of literacy, right? Like different social practices associated with reading and what constitutes good reading, fluid reading, etc. So it is a complex process. We wanted to give Tim a minute. I think he had a public service announcement regarding the certificates. So we're going to give Tim a minute. And then we're going to take a short break. So Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then maybe we'll take a short break till 5. So.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Just a little bit of housekeeping. So as you know, we do issue professional development certificates for your time with us. So I'm putting a link in the chat. If you could please use that link, it gives you an opportunity to submit your email address and your name as you would like it printed on your certificate, and our office will email you the professional development hours that correspond to this particular workshop. Please verify the email address, your spelling of your email address, and also of your name as you want it printed on these certificates. There's only one opportunity really to get this right. And hopefully the Office of Offsite Graduate Programs will get your certificate out to you hopefully within the week. And we will have we have 3 other workshops remaining, so you will see a different sign-up sheet for each day of the workshops as well.
So we're gonna pause here, and let's see, it's 4:50. So how about we come back at 4:55? So we'll take a quick 5-minute break, and then we're gonna come back. We're gonna talk more about science of reading, about literacy instruction, and then move to this question of what can and should we be doing for English learners when it comes to teaching reading. So take a quick 5-minute break.
Just before we go, to address something in the chat regarding students with interrupted formal education, because this workshop was focusing on the early grades, generally students with interrupted formal education are a little bit older. So we aren't going to be addressing that specifically in this workshop, but you are welcome to email me separately. I'll put my email in the chat, and I'm happy to talk about that and share resources that I might have for you regarding that. It really, you know, looking at older students and their literacy practices is really something that is completely different. In fact, Anne and I have discussed the idea that in our next world, we'd like to have English learners, you know, or any language learner be, you know, not have the same category for young students where everybody's building literacy, and older students where literacy is already assumed. They really have quite different needs. So please do email me and I can talk to you more about that.
All right, so let's take a 5-minute break. We'll see you back here a couple minutes before 5, and we'll continue on, okay?
And Catherine, I'm going to sign off. I've got to hit the road.
Okay, keep driving.
So thanks very much. Yeah, and if you just please remind everybody that the same link for tomorrow. So,
okay,
all righty.
All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Take care, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
If you're out there, please come back. We're gonna resume again. Hard to tell with the cameras off, so please come back. Okay, good. You're still there. Thank you.
We saw a lot of movement. That just shows the dedication of teachers to come back promptly when the bell rings.
Thank you.
So it's actually 10 o'clock here in England.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yes, in Chile, we are actually right now, because it's winter time, we're the same time as Eastern Daylight Savings Time. So we've been referring to it. Yes, but it's going to be dark here soon because it is winter. Okay, so I am going to share screen again, and we're going to just talk the last half hour we have together a little bit about pieces of the science of reading, or, you know, we're using that as kind of a catch-all, but really any I don't know if I want to say phonics-based curriculum, but any curriculum that has phonics in it, and some of the things that we recommend for English learners. So just quickly, because this has been so recent, the science of reading argues that that there are 5 components, and this is where we're really going to start to get into specific issues that we see that will lead us to recommendations. So the first, of course, is phonemic awareness of individual sounds in the English language. So to give an example, something like the word mat would be composed of the nasal bilabial followed by what in many phonics instructions we'll call the short A. It's important to note that in linguistics, there is no such thing as a short A. It has to do with the location and the tenseness of the vowel. So I refer to that as the low front A sound, and then the alveolar stop, the voiceless alveolar stop, right? And so that would be phonemic awareness, is being aware of individual sounds in a language. Phonics, which is the correspondence between sounds and letters in a particular language, which of course is going to vary widely. So when there is transfer between languages, if you speak another language, this is one of the areas where there can be issues because, of course, again, to note the French example, E-A-U is pronounced O, right? And so the correspondence between how the sound is represented and the phoneme that is associated with it is what's part of phonics instruction. One of the things that's also important to note is that phonics is not part of what you study when you study linguistics. So at times when curriculum talk about linguistic bases, or people in research talk about linguistic awareness, some of these things are actually not part of linguistics. The short and the long sounds, for instance, and also linguists do not study sound letter correspondence in that way. Fluency, which is the ability to process words in a, quote, fluid way. And I put that in quotes because fluency is not something that we can actually define. It's more something that you have an instinct for. You can tell when somebody is reading fluently, and they'll do things like X number of words per minute equals fluency. But that does not, you know, that's more of an arbitrary definition of what it means to read something fluently. Vocabulary would be being able to take the words and being able to know the meaning of them, and also being able to break it up into its components. So when you hear things like morphosyntax, what they're talking about is the ability to look at a word and break it up into its morpheme, which is the strongest word that, or the smallest part of the word that has meaning. So for example, a word unfeeling can be broken up into 3, which would be its kind of core morpheme, the word feel, plus an ing suffix, which gives it usually a progressive kind of sound, and then the prefix un, which gives it which means kind of opposite. And so by building up morphemes, we can look at individual words and be able to build their meanings. Many words, of course, are only made up of 1 morpheme. I chose one that was made up of 3. And then finally, comprehension, which is the putting strings of words together, which we would probably colloquially call a text, right? Being able to read a text and understand what it means. What is unclear to me in the science of reading is what is defined as comprehension. Is it knowing what the words mean literally, or being able to interpret the meaning of that text? My suspicion is it's more about being able to understand the literal sense of the text when they talk about the science of reading, but it is not clear 100% to what they refer to. Okay. So for the science of reading and for many, for all of the different approaches that come from this, components are built from the bottom up, which is why we begin in K2 with a lot more instruction in sound letter correspondence than we do as they get older. As long as they are developing typically, right? If you need intervention or if you are coming to school later, the idea is that then you do need to start with the sound letter correspondence at that age. Okay. So where are L's in this story? This comes back to the original question. And I want to give you some examples that I saw kind of in real time from the field of where the issues can lie, where the challenges that L's might face when these kinds of approaches are adopted and there isn't the attention to L's that maybe needs to happen. So to look at the first one, this actually comes straight from a foundations that I observed, a foundations lesson where students were going through, I think what they were being called their sound drills. So there was, they were kind of repeating chorus: A, apple, A, B, bat, B, C, cat, K, D, dog, D, and E, ed, Okay, and you had a picture of an apple, a picture of a baseball bat, picture of a cat, picture of a dog, and a picture of a man wearing a hat with the word ed on it. So I want to ask if you want to just put this into the chat, if you have any ideas of what could be problematic for English language learners. There's more than one answer to this, I think. There could be several issues that could cause challenges for L's that we would need to address if we were, working with multilingual students and going through these sound drills. So take a second if you have any ideas to put it in the chat. Right, they might not know the picture word in English. Unfamiliar with the words. Bat has multiple meanings. Yes. Yes, a lot of these sounds have an added at the end. The letter C has more than one sound. Ed can seem to be the word hat to them. Yes, that was actually the first thing I noticed when I was in the classroom. I actually would have thought it meant the word man potentially if I were a beginner, because it showed a picture of a man wearing a hat, but it could also be the word hat. Right, Ed is the name of a person. Yes. Okay. So also we have the issue that varieties of English can be different. Ed is not a usual name. For L's, need to say its name. They may pronounce the vowel sounds differently. Yeah. So you're really kind of getting a lot of the things that I did. So when we say something like B, bat, B, right? What you're actually producing linguistically is a B with a schwa sound at the end, which just means unstressed vowel, because it's hard to produce something like a stop without a stop, which is what a B is. A B sound is a bilabial stop without attaching something to it. Otherwise, you won't make a sound, right? However, when you connect that sound B to make a word like bat, that goes away, right? And this is something that we do in English regularly when we talk about individual sounds, and we just kind of understand through exposure and native proficiency that when we say b, what we really mean is something like m, right? That attaches onto any vowel. But if it's not their first language, it's something that could be quite confusing because not all languages aspirate or even attach a vowel sound to make a sound with a consonant, right? So that could be something that's confusing. C, we'll say things like hard C, soft C, but then really what the soft C is linguistically is represented by an S. And so again, the going between hard C and soft C can be quite, can be something that could be challenging that would need explicit instruction at some point. And then finally, for me, the ed one, I think, was the most confusing because it actually could contribute to a misunderstanding of form and meaning connection, and that E could be considered the actual name of, representing the word man as opposed to meaning the name of a person. And of course, the name Ed doesn't exist in every language either. And I did notice that when we got to particularly sounds that were less common, there would be, in an attempt to attach some sort of picture to that sound, there was sometimes these culturally specific connections made that were not necessarily then addressed in the ESL classroom. I actually saw this sound drill being done with English language learners, and they were going through it kind of in a rote fashion. I also saw a student who was able to recite it beautifully, and he was a new student, and he did struggle later on when they were actually reading a short story, but he did explain that he had learned these sound drills in a previous school district before he had gone back to his Spanish-speaking country and then returned to a different district in New Jersey. And he said, I'm sorry, this was in Pennsylvania. And he said, oh, I remember these sound drills. So it was unclear to me whether what he had done was kind of memorize the choral element of it or whether he had made the sound letter connection. Okay, here's another one. And this actually, I do address at the bottom the idea that some words, in some varieties of English, word families are pronounced differently. But here we had something where they were studying the un family, and they had the words bun, fun, sun, and hun put at the end. And then in the in family, bin, din, win, yin, and pin. And of course, as I noted, pen, the word pen can also be pronounced pin in certain varieties of English. I learned that when I lived in South Carolina for a short time. So just taking a moment here, what are potential issues you might see with this kind of presentation to English learners? So if you want to type in the chat again, that would be helpful. Okay, so yeah, no building of vocabulary. That was something that we did notice as well. Unclear what the words mean, right? And then not all the words are real words, right? One of the hallmarks of approaches that espouse the science of reading, as I had understood it when I was listening to the interview with one of the people that was at the forefront of it, was that including nonsense words was really important to make sure that students had understanding of sound letter correspondence, right? The problem is, of course, that if it's not explicitly told to English learners that these words or that these clusters of sound don't actually mean anything. And in the case of hun, of course, it could mean something if it had a capital H. Hun is also something you might hear in oral language as a short form of honey, but that's actually spelled H-O-N, right? Not H-U-N. So if those kinds of things aren't at some point made clear to English learners, this can also cause challenges in being able to build your skills in the language, right? And then, of course, also for even native English speakers, the idea that pin and pen could sometimes be interchangeable depending on what region you live in. That can also be problematic. So, you know, when we talk about sound letter correspondence, which accent, which variety of English are we referring to? And that is something that I have not heard be explicitly addressed. And then also, you know, how to present nonsense words to somebody that doesn't have the native speaker instinct that this is actually not a word. This is a cluster of sounds that sounds like other meaningful words, right? Okay. And so here is where we look at how the science of reading defines reading. The decoding of text plus the comprehension of language equals reading. They call this the simple view of reading. And one of the things that kind of, for me, has some flags to it that need addressing is if a student says, you know, for instance, looks at PIN and says pen because of their variety of English they speak. This then only leads us with that there is an issue with one of these two categories. Either they're not decoding it right or they're not understanding what they're reading. And that would lead us to start to build a case that the student has issues with reading itself. And one of the concerns I have is something that came up in the chat before, which is if we don't have ways to create space for people in second language who are learning to read in a second language or learning to read two languages concurrently, if they look at sound letter correspondence and transfer their knowledge of another language to English, the only space we have is to diagnose them as having problems with reading itself and not really looking at whether the issue might be in language development. Now, you know, one of the concerns I have is that because there is no talk about this when the science of reading is presented or other similar kinds of approaches, it worries me that this is going to go undetected. And this is something that Anne and I talked about quite a lot. And so teachers will be left to kind of make that leap of looking at, is a student developing in a language? And is this a case of transfer? Or is this a case of, you know, a student truly having issues with processing, you know, reading and language? And at this point, there's no clear answer to that. And that is another reason why having these curricula kind of go forth at quick speeds without stepping back to address what a significant number of students in districts are developing with, which is, you know, fluency in more than one language, developing literacy in more than one language, without a clear path forward as to how to address that. What we worry about is we are in the same boat that we have been with when the pendulum was looking at language more holistically, which is that English language learners are continually left behind, right? So to put my cards on the table, I believe that all approaches to reading instruction, where we've been and where we're going, are subject to critique because of this lack of explicit addressing and centering of English learners and their needs. At times, I've seen peripheral attention. I've seen inserts in boxed curriculum to say, you know, don't forget about the L's, but the attention given to them is really peripheral for a significant number of students in our districts. So where do we go with that? I think that's kind of where Anne and I wanted to end with and have enough time to have a question and answer as well. We go back to people that have been working on this, and one of them is, a recognition that literacy is something that is socially constructed. It is also a cognitive process. We know that through our research, but we also know that particularly when you are learning the language of a community that is not the language that is the dominant language of your home, there is an extraordinarily important part that is socially constructed. And when we are not necessarily centering that, we are missing a huge part of our student population. So some of the things that we recommend at this point, because I know that this was a shorter workshop, we could talk a lot more about all of these strategies. But one of them, I think the biggest one, is definitely using phonic methods in context and making form meaning connections salient for English learners. This might not be as necessary for monolingual English dominant students, but it is really necessary when you're working with students who are learning a second language concurrently or after they've built literacy in their first language. So one of the things that we saw happening in another English language classroom with a K2 teacher was when she was going through that, through the sound drills, she would take time to talk about what the picture meant. And so sometimes it was short. When they would say F is for foot, she would have them point to the foot. When she'd say H is for head, she'd say, everybody tap your head. Sometimes it was done quickly. Other times when it's a little bit more of a complex leap, like E is for Ed, she would spend time talking about who Ed was. Would ask them, do you have uncles named Eduardo? And would spend time talking about it so that they were making form meaning connections while they were building sound letter correspondence. Also, the idea that comprehension of text might have to be also a really important part of a young learner's building of literacy if they are in a bilingual program where they're being taught sound letter correspondence in 2 different languages. And to have some time to compare the different sounds and the different clusters of sounds that will make that will map differently in different languages. It's something that sounds instinctual to bilingual teachers, but it hasn't been explicitly addressed. And when we have so much to do in our day, making that explicit to teachers can be really helpful. Of course, supporting native language literacy practices. So if you are in a classroom where you aren't able to support the student's first language, giving them space to talk about, do you have this sound in the other languages you speak? Teach me about it, tell me about it. And having students make that connection can benefit that student and the other students who are also building biliteracy and bilingualism in different languages. Making sure that you're checking that the students are with you and are understanding what it is that they are doing when they're doing drills, I think is even more important for second language students, because if you're doing choral repetition, it's natural for students to follow, and that gives them oral language skill practice. But if they're not exactly sure what it is they're doing right now and why they're doing it, it can be something that they're simply repeating by rote and not really making that deep connection in their minds. Again, for native learners or for English dominant learners learning in their first language, you kind of know instinctually, okay, sound letter drills, I'm connecting sounds to letters and pictures that are familiar. But for other students where it's not, and it's not exactly clear what I'm doing right now, making it clear can be really helpful. And then, of course, encouraging reading outside of the classroom is something we will always encourage, no matter which side of the top down versus bottom up we fall on. We all encourage students to engage with literacy practices outside of the classroom. I think that's really crucial for bilingual students as well, having them bring in examples of things that they see in real life when they're out shopping or when they're out looking at street signs, things like that, to really help build that form meaning connection to them so that they are building their oral language proficiency and their language skills at the same time that they're building their literacy skills, because they might not have the immense amounts of input in their second language that they have in their first. When we're working with monolingual students, you get extensive amounts of naturally occurring input simply by talking with your family, being out on the street and hearing your language. When it's not your first language, it is not as robust. And so we still need to build that robustness in order for the connections to be made more deeply. Anne, did you want to add anything?
I'm muted. I think the bottom line is that the practices that we've been using with ELS are good practices. And we need to, I think, as we think about the science of reading and other more bottom-up approaches, that we still need to embrace a broad socio-cognitive view of reading. It has a cognitive piece, it has a bottom-up piece, but it has a top-down piece as well. If you want to go to the next one. That, as Catherine was saying, we must recognize the role of oral language proficiency in reading instruction and really use and advocate for techniques, like you all said in the chat, that focus on relationships between form and meaning. And remember that some of the things we do as teachers come from kind of instructional approaches. They're a little bit different from what we might see in linguistics. And so as we were in the chat talking about kind of different ways of defining terms, part of this is because words like phonemics, and the word phonemics is a branch of linguistics, but phonemic awareness means something a little bit different in the teaching of reading than it does to linguists. Linguists don't talk about phonics. Phonics is an approach that's trying to focus on the sounds of language and equate those sounds with, in English, letters. So we have a little bit of disconnect about what we mean by language and what we mean by language science in the teaching of reading. And then we go next. We need to resist, particularly as educators who work with multilingual learners, we need to resist efforts to cast English learners as problematic or deficient or struggling readers if they don't pronounce a particular phoneme or particular phone, a sound, right, in a particular way. Those of you who are Spanish speakers know that the E sound and the I sound are very important distinctive sounds for English speakers, but they're harder to distinguish if your first language is Spanish. So sheep and ship often come out the same. If someone says ship for S-H-E-E-P, it doesn't mean they're a deficient reader or that they don't recognize a ship is different from a sheep. So we need to be careful with that when we're working with multilingual learners and make room for phonological variation. And finally, we go to the last slide. We wanted to end today with some wise words from Timothy Shanahan. When someone tells you what to do in the classroom based on what they think a science of reading shows, or really any science, be a little skeptical. Ask to see the research that shows that teaching those things or in those ways improves learning. And so we leave it to all of you who are working with learners in your classrooms to ask those questions and to kind of stay the course, because we know you're under a lot of pressure and there's constantly, new ways of teaching are being cycled in, but your learners and you know what works with the learners in your classes. And remember that teacher knowledge matters too.
Yeah. And I think if there's any the takeaways from today really are about the idea that the notion of first language understandings applying to second language, that connection it has never been demonstrated. And in fact, we do know that literacy skills are built a little bit differently, that sound letter correspondence in languages, the variation can have both positive and negative transfer, which is something that comes from second language acquisition. And knowing that, you know, the leap to identify a struggling reader based on an inability to differentiate sounds in English when the student is not dominant English is how students get overrepresented as struggling readers when it might be an issue of language development, right? And that making form meaning connections are important from the outset when you are learning a second language. I think those are really our takeaways from today. If we had 8 hours, we'd have a lot more, but that's what we have for you today. If you have any questions, please do feel free to ask. We do have just a few minutes to hang on and answer any questions you might have. But thank you very much for having us. And don't forget that link to your certificate in the chat.
And we hope to see some of you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll hang out if there's any questions.
Yes, list the words vertically to highlight similar spelling. We call those minimal pairs. And great idea.
Thank you for the information. Quick question. What are we covering tomorrow?
This is going to be more for secondary teachers, although elementary teachers could benefit as well. We're going to talk about teacher talk in the classroom, a completely different topic. And we're going to discuss how to make your input comprehensible to English language learners.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, Mary Ellen, that is true. That is very true.
Yeah, we call those minimal pairs, I think I had mentioned, and that is something that is really helpful for students to isolate a sound and show like sheep, ship, and have them kind of practice that and make connections between the fact that sheep is meaningful and ship is meaningful, right?
Share our information. Do you mean the slides, Tatiana?
I can put my email. There we go. There's my email.
All right, I can put me too.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. We tried to keep it interactive, even though we had so many students, or so many teachers, I should say. Our Chilean is left.
All right.
I felt like the last lecture.
Hold on. Let me